At approximately 5:30 a.m. on Monday, July 16, 1945, in the desert of New Mexico, the nuclear age began. U.S. Lieutenant General Leslie Groves and physicist Robert Oppenheimer, both lead directors of the Manhattan Project, were among those who laid witness to the first ever detonation of a nuclear weapon. The nuclear test was codenamed Trinity, and the atomic device came to be known as the Gadget. Before this day, in what was a race to out-engineer the Germans, there had been doubt among U.S. scientists that the atomic bomb would work at all. What they witnessed, however, chased all doubt from the mind of everyone on site. In reflection, Robert Oppenheimer later famously remarked that the explosion had reminded him of a line from the Hindu scripture that translated, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The successful detonation in New Mexico set the stage for the use of nuclear weaponry in warfare. Less than 1 month later, the U.S. unleashed 2 atomic bombs on Japan. The first, codenamed Little Boy, was dropped on the city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. 3 days later, the second, codenamed Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. This marked the end of the Second World War. But with the end of one war came the beginning of another. The Cold War was a period of intense rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The indirectly confrontational standoff stemmed from ideological differences that came to be perceived as the capitalist West versus the communist East. Although the U.S. initially had monopoly over the knowledge and raw materials required for nuclear weaponry, the Soviet Union eventually covertly obtained the original blueprints of the Trinity design, leading to the development of the Soviets' own atomic bomb, nicknamed First Lightning. The detonation of this bomb in 1949 instigated a nuclear arms race between the two nations. Eventually, there came a point where the U.S. nuclear forces were rivaled by those of the Soviet Union, and it was acknowledged that each side could destroy the other many times over. This came to be accepted as a military doctrine known as Mutually Assured Destruction, also known as MAD. Ultimately, the doctrine recognized that there were no winners in the game of nuclear warfare. Despite this, mutually assured destruction almost became a reality in a 13-day period known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, a crisis that stemmed from the failed attempt by the U.S. to overthrow the communist government in Cuba, which resulted in Soviet reinforcements deploying nuclear missiles to Cuba in what was called a defensive strategy. The U.S. responded by intercepting all shipments to Cuba, which was regarded by the Soviets as an act of war. This instigated increasing tensions that almost resulted in a full-on nuclear blowout. Although the Cuban crisis was ultimately ended diplomatically, U.S. nuclear testing did not slow down, and the Soviet Union quickly followed suit. It is worth noting that as the world witnessed the increasing nuclear arsenal held by the U.S. and the Soviets, the United Kingdom, France, and the People's Republic of China, to a smaller extent, had also begun building up their own nuclear stockpiles. Although there had been previous efforts to halt the spread of nuclear weapons and calls for peaceful cooperation, it wasn't until the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, was opened up for signature in 1968 that both nuclear and non-nuclear powers started to commit to the idea. The NPT had 3 main goals. The first, to stop the proliferation of weapons. The second, to ensure peaceful cooperation between countries. And the third, to ensure disarmament. The treaty was the first to legally and politically commit the nuclear weapons states, at the time, the US, the Soviet Union, the UK, France, and China, to nuclear disarmament and prohibited proliferation of nuclear weapons. The treaty also prohibited non-nuclear states from attaining nuclear weapons themselves. 3 of the 5 nuclear states, that is, the US, Soviet Union, and the UK, were among the first to sign. Despite the signing of the NPT agreement, disarmament was slow. The Cold War continued on as other US and Soviet proxy conflicts persisted around the world. Although there was a period of improving relations between the Soviet Union and the US for a time, Soviet dealings around the world and in Pakistan and Afghanistan tipped the balance of an already precarious relationship, and the arms race between the nations accelerated. For a second time, the threat of nuclear war came close to reality in 1983, when already high tensions were intensified as NATO, a military alliance that included the US, performed a simulation of DEFCON 1, ready for nuclear attack. The Soviets, fearing that this might be more than a simulation, prepared for nuclear war. The deployment of nuclear defenses thankfully did not come to pass, as Soviet forces later identified the missile attack as a false alarm. In 1985, the Soviet Union came under new leadership. This brought in great reform that saw more relaxed policies. With this came an increasing demand for independence. This led to a series of revolutions that ended in the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. But was it really the end? Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, NATO continued its expansion of the East agenda by allowing Eastern European and former Soviet Baltic states like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to join the military alliance. This was a significant factor in the ratcheting up of tensions between Russia and the West. In recent years, the tensions have intensified, in part due to what has been viewed by the West as the Russian annexation of Crimea. This has been widely perceived as President Putin's attempt to re-establish a new Russian Federation and a violation of international law. As such, the US and the EU imposed sanctions against Russia that took a toll on the Russian economy, but did little to serve as heavy political influence. Currently, tensions are peaking at heights not seen since the 1980s. This is largely due to the ongoing proxy war in Syria, where the US and Russia are backing opposing forces. Recent reports have said that Russia have threatened to shoot down US aircraft that enter Syria. This will essentially start an outright war. This is made even more significant due to the reports of Russia preparing nuclear arsenal in the case that nuclear war does indeed break out.
I want to be clear to those who try to oppose the United States. I want to be clear to those who wish to do us harm. I want to be clear to those around the world who want to destroy our way of life and that of our allies and friends. The United States military, despite all our challenges, despite our op-tempo, despite everything we've been doing, will stop you and we will beat you harder than you've ever been beaten before. Make no mistake about that.
We'll beat you harder than you've ever been beaten before. He says, get ready for a war as big as World War II.
This threat comes in the midst of an impossibly precarious situation, one which, if rising tensions continue, can not only result in World War III, but mutually assured destruction. Is the third time the charm? So what is Canada's perspective on nuclear weapons? Well, Canada is one of the signatories on the NPT agreement and in many ways has technically adhered to this treaty, as the country does not have any nuclear weapons of its own. However, it's still maintaining an ambiguous policy toward nuclear weapons as it continues to support NATO's objectives. Although NATO's nuclear stockpile has decreased significantly over the last 30 years, Canada's support of continued possession of nuclear weapons by its allies runs counter to what Canadian policy states. As long as it provides support, Canada remains in a nuclear-armed alliance and endorses NATO's plan to retain nuclear weapons for the foreseeable future. In the international community, the move toward nuclear disarmament has not come as far along as hoped. In fact, since NPT was open for signing, 4 additional countries have become nuclear weapons states.
These governments, including the United States, broke international law when they failed to disarm their nuclear weapons based on a treaty from more than 4 decades ago.
Hello to you. South Korean officials believe North Korea has conducted another nuclear test.
I'm going to tell you about some breaking news right now. Fears that North Korea may have conducted a nuclear test. A magnitude 5.0 earthquake detected.
That the US is well aware of the real extent of Israel's nuclear arsenal. Here in Israel, whenever you question Israeli politicians as to whether or not Israel has nuclear weapons, they always answer with the standard no comment. And this is so as not to confirm or deny, and also leave a question mark as to how many nuclear weapons Israel has, if indeed it does have.
India conducted a series of nuclear explosive tests. India's action threatens the stability of Asia and challenges the firm international consensus to stop all nuclear testing.
Currently, there are 9 states in possession of nuclear weapons, including the United States, Russia, United Kingdom, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. The total is estimated to be between 15,000 and 16,000 nuclear arsenal. Russia and the US are estimated to carry around 7,300 and 7,100 respectively, with Russia currently exceeding the US in nuclear capacity. It goes without saying that the amount of radiation that will be given off by any such detonation has serious implications for human health. Those not within the immediate proximity of the blast will have extensive effects. These could range from the destruction of the body's capacity to produce red blood cells to central nervous system dysfunction. Those that survive the heat and blast effects would fall victim to radiation sickness in the weeks and months that follow, most unaware that they have been exposed to lethal radiation until the damage to their blood system manifests through bleeding gums, uncontrollable infections, or wounds that fail to heal. Along with severe health effects, the environmental effects of a nuclear detonation are devastating. The smoke and dust from nuclear warfare would cause an abrupt drop in global temperatures and rainfall by blocking sunlight from reaching the surface of the Earth. This global cooling would limit agricultural growth and shorten growing seasons. This would decrease food accessibility to millions of the poorest people on the planet. The Earth's ecosystem would be greatly off balance. A nuclear war would also cause a severe depletion of the ozone layer. There would be an increase in ultraviolet radiation, causing increasing rates of skin cancer, marine life damage, and crop destruction. Due to these effects on the environment, the global climate and agricultural production would be so severely disrupted that many people would be at risk of famine. Despite the immense threat of nuclear weapons, the world has become passive toward disarmament. The not-so-distant past has become myth-like to so many. Have we forgotten how close we have come to nuclear war twice before?
Deep down, people just don't give enough of a shit anymore. In the 1980s, hundreds of thousands of people pushed for disarmament in Central Park. But in May of this year, this is what a House hearing on nuclear security looked like.
We should point out probably one of the few hearings in which actually the attendance of the subcommittee compares very favorably with the attendance in the audience, because the public has not tuned into these issues as they should.
That's right. A hearing on the most dangerous things on Earth had attendance rivaling that of a weekday open mic poetry slam.
But it goes further than public interest. What does the public actually know about nuclear weapons?
No, absolutely not. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yes.
I don't know.
No? No, I've never heard of them before.
Well, we don't really talk about it in school, so I guess I don't know that much, and I could learn more.
It's time to wake up. We have seen how fragile political relations are. And more importantly, how the combination of distrust between nations and nuclear weapons can have disastrous effects. Is this the future we want? Some would say the best way to win this game is not to play. On the contrary, It is not to have the game at all.